I got into an argument the other day. No, this was nothing serious. This was just one of those dumb internet things, that's all. You see, I get messages from people all the time about Dream of the Red Chamber and translation. People seem to think that there's some magical way to do a full machine translation of the novel. And there is at least some merit to the idea, I guess. But it just doesn't work. It doesn't work right, and that's what the argument was all about. And I want to show you here why it doesn't work. Now, first off, I should tell you that there is a full machine translation of the book out there. Red Tower Dream by Eugene and Victor Ng was clearly done with the aid of machine translation tools. In fact, all of their translations of the Chinese classics into English was done with the help of machines. Now, these books were translated before AI chatbots were big, and it really shows. For example, the verb tenses in this book are all wrong. It's so bad that it is unreadable. And then you've got the names of the characters. Jia Baoyu becomes Jade. That's fine, except for the obvious fact that Jade is a girl's name in English. Anyway, I don't want to really rag on Eugene and Victor Ng too much, but you should be warned that their translations are really substandard. If you're interested in the Chinese classics, you need to find somebody who actually understands both literary Chinese and English and how the languages actually work. Don't just trust a machine translation or any translation put together by an engineer. The funny thing is that the problem with their translation is not just verb tense. I'll give you an example. Near the end of chapter 7, an older drunk family servant named Jiao Da shows up. There's a really funny scene where Jiao Da starts screaming obscenities and curses at the richer members of the Jia family. But then there's this really strange part right here where he says, Pa Hui de Pa Hui, Yang Xiao Shuzi de Yang Xiao Shuzi. Now, Pa Hui means literally to crawl in the ashes, which sounds kind of strange. It turns out that Pa Hui is actually a reference to the word Pa Hui, which means to scratch in the dust. So that's one problem with any kind of machine-based translation. You see, the spelling back in the old days all over the world was not really set in stone. It's not as formal as it is today. So it was common in older Chinese for incorrect characters like these to be used. Now, a chatbot, a good one, will recognize the connection if it's trained already on like a huge database. Basically, it's cheating by taking things from articles published about this, published translations of the books, yada, yada, yada. But even with all that, it might miss it, or it might hallucinate a connection for you that doesn't actually exist. Now, that verb, pa hui, originally comes from the book Plum in the Golden Vase, which means that there are some very adult connotations here. The verb specifically refers to a scandal between a father and his daughter-in-law. Yang Xiao Shuzi is actually a clue. Xiao Shuzi means one's husband's younger brother, and the verb yang implies an illicit connection. So basically, Jiao Da was openly accusing Qin Keqing and Wang Xifeng of adultery, right? These are two women having adultery with different people. And there's actually quite a bit of evidence in the book itself that Qin Keqing was actually having an affair. But the problem is that it's really difficult to translate this, and once you do translate this, you worry that you've just given everything away. David Hawkes translates it in sort of a cryptic way. Auntie has it off with Nevi is pretty clear, I suppose, though the original seems to imply a woman having an affair with her nephew. But the phrase father-in-law pokes in the ashes is totally meaningless in English. And so it's bizarre when Wang Xifeng gets angry at Jia Baoyu for asking her what it means. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. And that's the translator's problem that I was talking about. I mean, do you translate the phrase literally? I presume that that's what the machine's going to do for you, but then the reader has no idea what's going on. Or do you go into detail about what the phrase means in this context, right? Do you assume that your reader should know nothing about the book and act like, you know, they have no pre-knowledge at all of anything? Or do you assume that the reader should know as much as the average reader would have known in China in like the 19th century? Or do you try to make things as easy as possible for your reader? That's the real question. Gladys Yang decided to do a little bit of both. She talks about carrying on with younger brothers-in-law, which is a clear translation of the Chinese. The first part is simply translated as scratching in the ashes, but with a footnote, and the footnote clarifies the adulterous implications of the phrase. Now, I guess that that's a little bit better, but it's still missing a really big piece. So the problem is that that cryptic phrase actually provides us with a lot of insight into how the book was originally composed, and this is where it becomes really fascinating. Now, we've got to take a closer look at the introduction to the David Hawkes translation to find all of this. Hawkes has a brief discussion about what he considers inconsistencies in the book. He notes that Qinke Qing is given a lavish funeral when she suddenly and mysteriously dies in chapter 13. He also notes that the predictive poems about her imply that she will take her own life, something that never actually happens. Now, the truth is that the poems don't just imply that she's going to take her own life. They say so really directly. I mean, it's really straightforward. There's no ambiguity at all. When he reads the book with the fates of all the characters, back in chapter 5, Jia Baoyu first sees short poems accompanied by pictures. Qinke Qing's poem includes a painting of a beautiful woman hanging herself from a beam. There's also another longer poem later on in the chapter that goes along with the shorter one. Note the talk here about the dust falling from the painted beam. This is a direct reference to Qinke Qing taking her own life. Now, the part here that's inferred is that Cao Shuiqin was asked to remove references to a certain event from his book. Either that or somebody took them out for him. Allegedly, these references refer to a relationship between Qinke Qing and her father-in-law Jia Zhen. And the connection is that allegedly Cao Shuiqin's own father also had a relationship with one of his daughters-in-law. At least that's what the assumption is in the literary community. David Hawkes goes on to describe this as it was noted in one of the many handwritten manuscripts that passed down over the centuries. And there is a rumor that it may have been Cao Shuiqin's father that ordered this part of the story taken out. But of course, we don't know that for sure. We can only surmise. And the thing is that this is really the fun part of the novel. In fact, this is precisely the sort of thing that machine-based translation really can't do. Even ChatGPT is going to have a difficult time telling you precisely what it says in the handwritten manuscripts and precisely why it matters. It's going to hallucinate like crazy all over you. If you use it, you have to know the source material yourself. If you don't know it yourself, you're going to wind up with really, really strange results. You really need an actual human being to help you make sense of it all. Now, I have respect for David Hawkes as a scholar. However, he was clearly a Western scholar of Chinese literature, no matter how hard he tried not to be that. All this talk about inconsistencies in this book really makes me scratch my head. And Hawkes' implication here that Cao Shuiqin might not have finished the novel due to his despair is simply incorrect. You see, the problem with that conclusion is that David Hawkes really didn't understand as much as he should have about how classical Chinese literature was actually composed. The reason why he didn't understand this is because he presumed, like so many other Englishmen, especially from the Victorian era, presumed that it was composed much the same way that English literature and European literature was composed, or at least that we assume it was. Now, today we know a lot better, thanks in large part to the Cambridge history of Chinese literature. Regarding supposed inconsistencies, the author of this section on the Ming Dynasty novels in the Cambridge history talks a lot about the plum in the golden vase. In particular, the author notes that critics of that time loved finding references in the book, both references moving forward and references moving backwards, self-referential, that is, within the book itself. That kind of repetition is what gave the novels their charm, and there's a chance that they were likely pieced together by a number of authors, not just one. Now, this idea of the editor making changes in black ink instead of red ink might seem bizarre, strange, and wrong to most of us. We're used to the author being the author, not the author sharing in the authorship with a whole bunch of editors and commentators, including people who might have added things over the centuries to the book. Think about the Bible and how it was likely put together. But the thing is that this is really the way that it happened back in the olden days. In fact, it seems that it was expected in those days that novels would be largely unfinished. There is a notion here that some novels were deliberately left unfinished. And so the novels of that time were open not only to rewriting, but to having works finished by people who were not the original author of the book, sort of like letting the comments on your blog write the blog for you. The main issue here is that the concept of the novel and the sort of discourse surrounding the novel was just different in China in the 17th and 18th centuries. Anyway, keep all of this in mind as we go forward. That machine translation approach might not be improper all the time. In fact, I think if you're a serious translator, it can help you out a lot. But we have to remember that literature was created by humans for humans. The human touch is the most important touch of all for real translation and for meaningful literary analysis.